am Matt Kaufman, and with me today is Brent Rhodes, an associate with Hathaway Kunz. And for the first time ever, we have a special guest that's not Hathaway Kunz, Colin Crossman, who's the director of the business division of the Wyoming Secretary of State's office. So welcome, Colin. Welcome, Brent.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Well, today, just to give everybody sort of a picture of where we're going, we're going to talk about business entities and specifically some of the kind of the nuts and bolts of dealing with the Secretary of State's office and some of the common issues that we see and address on a daily basis with respect to business entity filings. But before we get into some of that stuff, I thought it might be fun, Colin and Brent, let's talk just a little bit about why Wyoming is so popular in the first place. And Colin, maybe I'll start with you. We hear all the time that Wyoming is number 2 in the country behind Delaware for business entity filings. So first question, an easy one. Is that true?
Well, I think we were number 1 briefly in terms of new filings, new LLC filings. So it depends on how you slice the numbers. Okay, so we are number 2 overall, and we have been that way since probably for about 8 to 10 years. Back when Nevada was number 2, they increased their fees significantly, and Wyoming didn't. And so a lot of organizations chose to move out of Nevada to Wyoming because of that. And I believe that they didn't have the same online system that we did. At the time, we had one of the better online systems in the country, one of the best. And so that was why we took the number 2 slot. But Wyoming has always been kind of a leader. We invented the LLC in 1979, 1978. And we're also the first place with the DAO and a couple other things. But recently, of course, Delaware has had some difficulties, let's say, and people have been moving out of Delaware, and Wyoming has taken some of that flow. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let me ask you this, and this might be a 2-part question, but I mean, LLCs, hands down, the number 1 entity that's chosen in your office?
By far, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see, I think we have 600,000 LLCs.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So follow-up question to that, outside of corporations, which is an obvious, very popular entity, what other entities are the most common that you see routinely?
Oh, well, so of course, LLCs and various flavors of LLCs are the top. Then corporations, which here in Wyoming we call profit corporations. Other states, you may hear them as Schedule C or Delaware C. They're all, depending on the state laws, they're all very analogous. Then you have nonprofits. You have limited partnerships. Those are pretty specialized. Unless somebody, when we get calls into our office asking about limited partnerships, it's usually you don't really want one unless your lawyers are telling you want one. And we have trusts and foundations and other such things like that, including all the way down to the unincorporated nonprofits. Now we have 2 flavors of those, neither of which are technically required to file with us, but can choose to do so if they want a little bit of formal recognition.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna kick over to you, Brent, now before we get into some of the filing logistics with Colin. But we get calls all the time in our office. People are just so enthusiastic, not just from Wyoming, but all over the country and the world, right? With people wanting to incorporate or create LLCs, trust, whatever it is, in the state of Wyoming. What are some of the reasons that we hear time and time again that people are after that makes Wyoming so attractive, do you think?
Sure. Well, one of the reasons, as you just talked about, a lot of the people that call us, they're not just from Wyoming, and they're not just from our country. One of the big benefits we have here in Wyoming is there isn't a citizenship or a nationality requirement. We, of course, have, to the extent possible these days, anonymous LLCs, and we have a lot of protective laws on who can be here and who can access what kind of information. And then on top of that, we have no state income taxes. We have a fantastic Secretary of State's office that makes filing about as easy as it gets anywhere in the country. We have a lot of access to attorneys that know what they're doing. I mean, the list is pretty exhaustive as to why a lot of folks want to come to Wyoming. But as Colin said, really, I think the speed and efficiency that we work and how we manage ourselves here in Wyoming is really the thing that draws a lot of attention.
So I'm gonna pick up on that theme real quickly, the speed, because Colin, when somebody files, well, first of all, let me back that up. because we're one of the few places that you can create an entity completely online, right?
Yep.
In almost real time. But that's limited to the main forms like LLCs, corporations, et cetera. But so outside of those instances where we have this amazing system that you can file online and kind of instantaneously create, walk us through just a little bit like the normal process of somebody filing something with your office and kind of how long it takes. Because I want to highlight for people, we're pretty efficient and we're pretty quick, despite being number 2.
Yeah. Well, so we have, of course, you can file online, and assuming that the name doesn't have a problem, I like to say that the hardest part of forming a corporation in Wyoming is choosing your name. Assuming the name doesn't have a problem, a lot of people do want to pick names that are very similar and perhaps too similar to other companies. So we do have a name check process. But assuming that's not an issue, you can have that LLC basically online within 25, 30 minutes. And that's really just you filling out the paperwork, or you or your attorney or representative doing it. So once an entity is filed, or if it's one of the types that can't be filed online, we do have a 15-day business day statutory maximum. So if you have to send it in on paper, then we will have it processed within 15 business days. Which, as far as I'm aware, there aren't any other states that have that statutory deadline, and that's not just filings of new documents, but amendments or any other filing for a corporation. So there was a point last year, I believe, where a different state had a 2 to 3 month delay unless you paid for their expedited process. In Wyoming, we don't officially yet have an expedited process. We're going to try again, I believe, next year in the legislative session. But that aside, we have that statutory deadline, so your document will get processed within 15 business days of our receiving it.
So,
and Matt, if I may just add, ironically, just earlier today, I formed an LLC for a client. And in addition to everything that Colin just said, one of the amazing things about Wyoming is that the initial filing fee, I believe, is $105. You can do it online. You receive the articles of organization right away. And so not only are we talking about a process that's relatively painless and quick, but compared to the rest of the states, it's very affordable.
Yeah.
I did actually want to point out one thing you had mentioned earlier, that Wyoming has still has the aspect of having an anonymous or privacy maximized LLC system. In order to take advantage of that, you do need to hire a third party, an attorney or a registered agent, to process your documents, because here in Wyoming, your agent can execute the documents for you. And the Secretary of State's office does not collect, quote unquote, beneficial ownership information for LLCs. So if an individual were to file their LLC online, they are executing that LLC document, so their name is going to appear on it. If that person does want to take advantage of the heightened privacy protections that we have, they do have to have a third party file it for them.
Yeah, I have this conversation with prospective clients and clients all the time. They want to have this anonymous LLC, but along the line they've failed to learn, and it's not been explained that was exactly that. When you're online and you're forming these LLCs, there are these organizers. They're the individuals that are organizing the LLC online, and you do have to provide at least some base amount of information. So as Colin said, in order for it to be truly anonymous, in the sense that you can have that these days, you are going to have some sort of third party. An attorney's usually how people do it, but there are other agents that you can turn to as well to seek that extra layer of protection.
So that anonymity is an interesting theme to me because it cuts both ways, right? It's very attractive to people. We get that a lot. Instantly, you've probably noticed our office kind of takes a position. We're not doing anonymous filings for people, right? Just because it's not how we operate. If you really want to be anonymous, go hire somebody else, to do that. But I'm kind of curious. If you could ballpark it for us, what percentage do you think of LLCs are really seeking anonymity versus those that aren't? Or is that even a fair question?
That's very hard to say, because a large chunk are taking advantage of it, by accident. I mean, whether or not they are interested in it or not, if you use a registered agent, the registered agent is probably just going to process the documents for you. I do know, I am very aware that there are many people that are explicitly seeking it out. And of course, like you said, it's a double-edged sword. Obviously, it can be abused, just like freedom of speech. Anything like that can be abused. But there's also plenty of reasons why you would, a perfectly legitimate reason would be an individual who is, potentially fleeing an abusive spouse and doesn't want them to have an idea of where they live, and they put their new residence inside of an LLC, and their name is not attached to it, so they can't be tracked down. There's plenty of good reasons why these things can exist and should exist, but it is a very strict. You have to follow it exactly to get it done that way. And if you were to file it and breach the privacy and breach your own privacy, there's nothing you can do. You have to dissolve that entity and move on and start a new one. Yeah.
Well, and the last thing I was going to say about the privacy, and then we can move on. But I also find it interesting to your point about people not being informed. We also have a lot of instances where people have LLCs formed. They accomplish some form of anonymity, but they don't recognize that there's annual report filings.
Yep.
And then they file an annual report filing, fill it out, and their name is suddenly attached to the LLC, and they don't understand that or don't realize that. So we see that quite a bit. I imagine you hear that all the time.
Yeah. That's one of the that's a complaint we get from people. Like, I filed this, I shouldn't have. Can you change my name? Sorry. You have to, just like any, for instance, if you have an LLC, it's a business, and if you treat it as a, just a personal piggy bank, the IRS is going to look through it. And you're not going to have your corporate, your corporate shield or your tax benefits. You have to respect the corporate formalities to maintain the privacy benefits as well.
Yeah.
And the annual reports really cause a whole different. It's a bit of a different conversation because they cause a lot of other problems too. One of the issues I often see is not only do people not understand that they'll have these additional filings yearly, but either by complete accident or intentionally to try to withhold information or to remain anonymous, they just won't file annual reports, and then that leads to a whole new set of issues for those people and those entities.
So we're going to come back to the not filing in a few minutes, and we're going to talk about dissolutions and things. But before we go there, an enormous topic that you both have spent a ton of time dealing with in recent years is something called the Corporate Transparency Act, which was a federal act. I think it was signed by Trump under his last
In fact, it was. And
administration. But it didn't go into effect until January of this year. And I'm summarizing, but effectively the Corporate Transparency Act made it so if you're a business entity that registers with the Secretary of State, and there's certain exemption thresholds, but generally you had to now file with the Financial Enforcement Crime Network. FinCEN, thank you. And basically disclose who the ownership was. And so there's been this enormous policy debate going on nationwide about, is this an invasion of privacy? Right? Does it suddenly negate the anonymity? What happens to that information? And interestingly, I know, Colin, you've been at the heart of this. There's suddenly this year been litigation because that rule went into effect. Everyone in the country that had a business entity had to file within a certain amount of time of creating a new entity. If you had an existing entity, you had a certain amount of time to comply. There was some federal litigation. The act was put on hold. Then it went back into effect.
It was the most.
It's on hold again, and currently it's kind of just no one's following it. So can you talk a little bit about that from your office's perspective? And I know you've participated to some extent.
So it was the most interesting amount of judicial whiplash I've ever seen. Where we had a nationwide injunction put into place, and then an emergency appeal, where the initial appellate panel, the emergency appeal panel, reversed the stay, and then it got to it was handed off to the merits panel, and they put the stay back in, and then of course then FinCEN appealed to the Supreme Court, and this is where I got directly involved. Before that, I was just advising and helping the constituents and here in Wyoming and on our business community understand what's going on, but my boss, the Wyoming Secretary of State, along with Senator Cynthia Lummis, filed an amicus brief in the Supreme Court opposing the removal of the stay, which would have had the effect of making it so that nobody had to file. Because in our view, there's a due process violation because nobody really knows what's going on when the judges can't even figure it out, and there's an impingement on state authority and the feds exceeding their constitutional authority. The Supreme Court, however, disagreed with that, and just because they don't like. They generally don't like universal injunctions. So they reversed the universal injunction, allowing the law to go into effect, not realizing there was yet another case that had a universal injunction also. So their ruling was kind of moot at that point. And then that judge reversed his stay based on the Supreme Court like 4 weeks later. But by that point, the new administration had taken office, and literally the day before everything was supposed to go into effect again, Treasury Secretary Bessent came out and said, nope. So right now, I believe, as of this moment, whatever day this is and we're filming this, you do not have to file unless you are a foreign-owned, as in not an American citizen-owned entity. And even then, I think there's some exceptions, but it's currently being reviewed by the political process, and who knows where it's going to end up. The cases, the judicial process is still pending. The 11th Circuit and the 5th Circuit have yet to do anything, and so we'll see.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, and just for our viewers and listeners that don't know, I mean, states control entity law, right? States are where entities are created, authorized. So this is really the first time ever we've seen some sort of a national registration, which in and of itself is just weird, right? But then asking for the disclosure of information on all these entities that people are taking great lengths to keep private, keep out of the hands of the federal government. It's a very interesting policy discussion that has never happened.
It's what's unique is everyone says, well, you got to file your taxes with the IRS anyway, so what's the big deal? Well, a big deal is the IRS is not a criminal enforcement agency. They are a civil agency, whereas FinCEN is a criminal agency. So there's Fifth and Sixth Amendment or Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment concerns because you are being forced to disclose your information to a criminal enforcement agency, not a civil agency. And of course, the IRS has some rules about whether or not when they're allowed to disclose tax returns with other agencies. They're very strict. Whereas FinCEN, any foreign law enforcement agency could request it, and they would just share it without a warrant. Whereas a state, like if Wyoming wanted to get that information, we had to request a warrant from a federal judge to get access to it. Whereas if England wanted it, here you go.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about it too is it was a bit more evasive, or rather invasive, than you would imagine, in the sense that, before all the whiplash in our office, we were trying to decide, how are we going to handle this? Are we going to help with these filings? How in the world should we advise our clients on how to handle this? And I did help at least one client do some of these filings. And even me as the filer, a Wyoming attorney creating a Wyoming LLC for Wyoming residents, I had to give my ID, I had to have my social security numbers, I had to be in the database, I had to be pre-approved as a filer. So all of a sudden, even though I'm only participating in these state activities with a state bar license and with state residents, I'm, engaging heavily in this federal practice.
Yeah, it's a great point. Well, at least for now, we don't have to worry about the Corporate Transparency Act. We'll see, I guess, what happens. But it's been quite a year.
Yeah.
That's been a major topic, which really snuck up on people. I feel like a lot of folks weren't paying attention to that. And then it was here and it was a big mess. And so thankfully it goes away, but
yeah.
Well, thanks. Okay. So now maybe, Colin, we want to dive in just a little bit while we have you here and talk about some of the various issues that we get calls on all the time from clients about just kind of the common issues, problems that they're dealing with their business entities. And so Brent, maybe I'll start with you on the first one. You talked a little bit about people forgetting, as an example, to file their annual reports or not realizing that there's annual requirements with business entities. So invariably when that happens, the entity winds up getting what we call administratively dissolved after a period of time. Talk a little bit about what that means and what the process is to fix that and what we often deal with.
Sure. So interestingly enough, this is how I met Colin. So here in Wyoming, we have this requirement that you file annual reports that are associated with your annual fees and all of that you have for your business. And the price of these annual reports and the annual fee you have to pay is associated with the amount of assets and the value of those assets inside of Wyoming. Well, when you file this annual report to tell Colin here what assets you have and what this fee is going to be, that has to be done yearly. And it can be done in a number of ways. Most entities have an office manager or an agent or an attorney who does these routine yearly filings for them in whatever states they're practicing in. And some entities have their registered agents do that. The issue, of course, is very common corporate practices can lead to some major issues. Say you have a new office manager and your new office manager had no idea that filing annual reports was something that he or she was supposed to do. Or say you failed to pay your registered agent's yearly fee and now you don't have a registered agent, which puts you sideways with the Secretary of State over here, but also you no longer have these required annual reports being filed. Well, when you do that and you're administratively dissolved by the Secretary of State, according to the Wyoming statutes, is after 2 years, if you catch this inside the 2-year window, you can file an application with the Secretary of State. And, if the Secretary of State's fine with your reasons or your excuses, or, if you can pay those back fees quick enough, it's usually not that big of a deal. The problem is when you're outside that 2-year window, now we have to actually seek judicial input and judicial assistance, which is a much more it's a much more heavier process, and it's not necessarily just trying to explain to the Secretary of State that something went wrong. It is actually a petition to a Wyoming district court to be reinstated.
Yeah. So, we've done quite a few of those, right? And we see that often. And just to piggyback on and emphasize the problem, like using your example, Colin, somebody buys a house and puts it inside of an LLC, and then that LLC gets administratively dissolved and you're outside the 2 years. You might not have a way to convey that property, right? Or sell that property legally, at least from the title perspective. We see that with deaths all the time. People die and the entity is dissolved. So this, we even see it with publicly traded entities from time to time that are listed on a stock exchange and somebody let it lapse into dissolution. Now you have shareholders holding shares in the public company out there and the company doesn't technically exist. So this can be a really big problem.
It's also a very big problem for trademarks, patents, and contracts. Mm-hmm. That, in my experience, that's really where people get caught, is that, this entity lapse. Sometimes they even know, I'm administratively dissolved. That's fine. This entity isn't doing anything. We're not active right now. But then, 5 years later, all of a sudden someone realizes, oh, wait, we have all these contracts with these vendors, or our trademark or our patent or our office building was inside this LLC. And now we have a real problem.
Mm-hmm. So Colin, kicking it back to you, from your perspective, if we could give our listeners a top 2 or 3 tips, right? How do we avoid dissolution and what to do if you get dissolved from your perspective? What are the most helpful things that people could know or keep in mind?
The best thing to do is make sure that you have if you're not on top of it yourself, make sure you have a registered agent that's on top of it. And many registered agents, as part of the services that they provide, and of course, registered agent is not technically required if you, the owner of the business, are physically present in Wyoming. If you are if you're not physically present here, you must have a registered agent. That is the agent for the service of process. And these companies have a wide range of services for wide-ranging prices. Some of them are like as low as $25 a year, but you're not getting anything for that. But many of them will provide you with hey, you have to file your annual report. We can do it for you. It'll cost you extra, but you have to do it or your company goes inactive. So that's probably the single most important thing, is to make sure you have a registered agent, because if you don't, we're going to violate you on that. And if you miss your annual report, we're going to violate you on that. If you do miss it, like as Brent said, there is the procedure, the reinstatement procedure, that for a penalty fee and paying all of the back taxes, you can be reinstated. But that's only about a 2 year period. After that, you do have to go to the judicial reinstatement route, which is, as you might imagine, significantly more involved, significantly more expensive. It can be relatively quick because it's not a whole trial; it's just a petition, but.
Quick in the judicial sense.
Quick in the judicial sense, yes. Not in the if it's a reinstatement with us, depending on the type of reinstatement, that can also be filed online and can be done in a couple of minutes. So many states have these sorts of things. Wyoming is a bit unique in that I think we do it on the anniversary of when you file, whereas some states, I think, I believe North Carolina, it's every January or every April 15th, just like tax day. So there are, if you are managing multiple entities across multiple states, you do have to keep that in your head, and that's where your registered agent in each state can maybe give you a hand. But I will give you an example of there was a big nonprofit, 501c3 nonprofit. That they were in multiple states, and they let it lapse, and we had to assist them in getting it reinstated in another state so they could reinstate here, because they were continuing to raise large amounts of money, and it was a bit of a thing.
One thing that just came to my mind too that people should watch out for is the fact that we're dealing with an entity, right? You filed an entity with the Secretary of State's office. If you're inside that 2-year window, as Colin just discussed, sure, you can quickly get that application to the Secretary of State's office. They're responsive, as we've already discussed. But if you miss that and you have to do the judiciary, you can't do that yourself because that's the illegal practice of law. You can't file a petition in court on behalf of an entity unless you are a lawyer. So one of the unfortunate situations you're going to be in is you're going to have to find a Wyoming lawyer to do that for you.
That actually is a great point that most people don't realize. We have rules in Wyoming. I think most states have very similar rules, but everyone's heard the term pro se, right? You can represent yourself in court. Entities can't.
No,
right?
they can't.
You have to have legal representation, which is great for our business, but that is a real fact that does get thrown around a lot.
Yeah, and it really, at least our office, we're able to do it pretty efficiently, and it doesn't necessarily hurt that much in a financial sense, but it hurts a lot more than it would have if you had just stayed on top of it and made sure someone was filing those annual reports.
Okay, I'm going to piggyback off something you said about a lot of people failing to pay, the annual fee. A common question that we get all the time, Colin, is, this annual fee. First of all, I call it a fee and not a tax because we like to say we don't have very many taxes in Wyoming, even though I think it's technically a tax. I don't know what it is, but basically, the Secretary of State has a formula that when you file your annual report for whatever business entity it is, you sort of compute the value of the assets within the state of Wyoming, and then you pay a fee based on that. Yeah. So it is calculated, I suppose, in some extent like a tax. But there's always a lot of misconceptions about that. So can you help us clear it up? It is only for assets that are within the state of Wyoming. That's correct?
Yeah, so it's assets that are physically in Wyoming. So if you're a Wyoming entity and you do all of your business in another state, Colorado, North Carolina, and the only connection to Wyoming is your registered agent and your corporate domicile, no physical assets in Wyoming, you are going to pay the $60 annual report fee, which is that's what everybody has to pay. Nonprofits are a little bit less, but if you're an LLC, that's it. If you have assets in Wyoming, let's say you have a building, not a lease, but a building that it owns. If that building is worth more than $300,000, then you're going to go above that $60. And at that point, you just figure out how much the value of the asset are in Wyoming, and it's 0.2%. So $300,000, shocker, is $60. So that's where the break is, and that's real assets, personal property. There are some intangibles, minerals underground, things like that, but only the assets in Wyoming. So let's say you have, say $1 million of assets in Wyoming and $10 million in another state. We don't care about those. That's it.
All right. Well, thanks, Colin. Thanks, Brent. This has been a great discussion. Maybe let's stay tuned. Maybe we could do this again for a part 2 and dive deeper into some of these discussions. Colin, thank you. And for our viewers and listeners out there, if you've got questions or issues with the Secretary of State's office, now you know who to go talk to. Talk to Colin.
Yeah, you'll actually get a person.
That's right. Well, thank you both for this discussion. It's been great. Can't wait to see you all next time.